Good afternoon, or evening, or night, or morning, wherever you happen to be viewing this. And welcome to today's video, which is going to be talking about lists in Snap. So up until this point in our studies of Snap, we have looked at variables in a number of different contexts. So for example, we have looked at variables that we could make. Just call this one score. And these sorts of variables, which appear in the variables palette, would be available and visible anywhere. We have also looked at variables that we could create as script variables. So if I have a script variable, it means that it's only going to be visible within this script. We have also looked at how we could create our own block. So for example, I might say draw a circle of radius, and then I could define a variable here as an input, and I'm going to call the name of my input radius, and I'm going to specify that it can only contain a number. So here too we have a variable, and once again this variable could only be used within the script of this block. All of these variables, though, up until this point have been able to store only one value at a time. So if I have score is either 0 or score is 1, or if I have A is going to be, maybe it's a number, maybe it's a word, but the point is it's going to store one value. And likewise with our variable that we saw as an input in a block. And this makes sense when you studied variables in math class, when you had f of x equals x squared plus 7. X was going to be 3 or x was going to be 5. You couldn't put a 3 and a 5 into one variable. It could only store one value at a time. Well, Snap has something else. It's a data structure called a list. And a data structure means it's a way of structuring or organizing data. And lists are able to store multiple values at one time. So to create a list, let's just take a look here at our list reporter. And right now we have a list with just one element, but we can make a list with multiple elements, as many or as few as we need. If we need fewer, we could just click on that. So for instance, I could do A, E, I, O, and U. Here's an example of a list that has 5 elements. Now the elements are numbered, so A is in position 1, E is in position 2, and so forth. And we would say that the length of this list is 5 because it has 5 elements. We can do a number of things with lists, and in order to illustrate that, we're probably going to have to start off. It's probably easiest if I make a variable here, and I'm just going to call this lister. And so lister is going to be visible here on the stage. And I'm going to use my set block, and I'm going to set lister to, and I'll just go ahead and drag this in. There we go. And so when I click on it, you will see that a list appears. And I've got A, E, I, O, and U in it. What can I do with a list exactly? Well, I can extract particular items from a list. So for instance, I could ask for item 1 of my list. Let me grab lister and drag it in here. And you notice, let's just look at that icon for this block again. Notice that I've got something orange with sort of a little table here. That's the symbol that they use for a list. So this input can only accept a list. I can't put like a number in here. Let me just get rid of it here. Notice how it's glowing red because it's upset because there wasn't any value there. So I can ask for element 1 of lister, which is an A, or I could ask for element 2 of lister, which is an E, and so forth. I could also ask for the last element. The last element, of course, is a U. Or I could just ask for any element, in which case it gives me them random. There's a U, there's an I, there's an O, an A, an I, an I. Notice the I repeated. Random means it's going to pick something by chance, but by chance something could repeat. We have the ability to make lists grow and shrink. So for instance, I'm going to take my list, lister, and I'm going to add something to it. And I've got A, E, I, O, U, and I believe the rule is sometimes Y, so I'm going to go ahead and run this. Notice that I can just click on this, and you notice now, oops, I'm sorry, I double-clicked. Well, that's good. This will give me a chance to illustrate something else. But I double-clicked, so I have 2 Y's in here. Let me demonstrate the delete. So I'm going to go ahead and choose delete. And I'll bring this in here. And I'm going to delete the last. So when I click on this, the Y goes away. If I click on it again, the last also goes away. So now my list is back to being a list of 5. I can also do an insertion. So for instance, if I insert at position 1, it means that it's going to go here and everything that was in position 1 on down gets bumped. So if I inserted, rather than the word thing, actually there of course is no vowel before the A, but let me do the at sign. If I insert an at sign at position 1, I need to specify of what? Of a list, at 1 of, so I'm going to insert the at position 1. There we go. There's the at right there. And if I decided to insert it at position 4, well, there's position 4. It's got an I in it, so the IOU are going to be bumped down. Watch closely. There we go. The IOU were bumped down. And I could also insert it at a random location. So I have the ability to insert, to delete, to add. I can also do replace. So I could replace the item in position 4. I guess I'll just go ahead and type a 4 here. In position 4 of the list with nothing at all. I can actually put something empty in here. At least I think I can. Let's find out. Yep, now there's nothing there. And I'm going to just get rid of element 4 because I frankly don't like it. I have this thing about the number 4. No, just kidding. Delete element 4, and element 4 is gone. I'm going to delete element 1, and now I'm back to my list. So as you can see, you can take a list and you can manipulate it in a number of different ways. Lists do not, this example notwithstanding, need to always contain the same values. So I've got AEIOU. The fact that the list here is using a square input, the square input means you can put anything into it. So for example, I could put a number in here. I could put a word in here. I could put, brace yourself, a list in here. So for instance, I'm just going to take my list over here, and I'm going to put my list in here. And now I have a list with a number, a word, and a list. So, and I could make, if I felt so inclined, a list of lists. So in fact, I am completely free to put anything at all that I want to into a list. Go through one last fairly complicated example with lists before we bring the festivities to a halt tonight. So let us consider the problem of taking a list and rearranging the order of the elements. So I've got my basic list here, AEIOU, and I want to go ahead and shuffle the elements. Well, one way to do that would be to take two elements, let's say the E and the U, and swap them. So put the U in for the E and the E in for the U. And then if we could repeat that over and over again, we would end up mixing up the list. So let's consider doing that. And if we look over here, we will see there is no block that can actually swap items. So that's not a problem. We can make our own block. So I'm going to click on Make a Block, and I'm going to create a command, and I'm going to put it in the Variables palette, and I'm going to call it Swap Items and of. Now that might seem like a very strange name, but I want to swap items, let's say A and B of a list, so I need to have the spaces for my inputs. So I'm going to swap items, and I'm going to put here an input which I'm going to call A, and I want to insist that A be a number, because I'm going to pick positions in my list. Swap items A and click here, and this input will be a B. I also want it to be a number of, and I need to give a name to the list, and I could call it list, but I do like the name Lister. It relates to a Red Dwarfs television series from the BBC that I highly recommend. So I'm going to use Lister rather than list. Also, when I'm expositing things, it helps sometimes if I use the word list to denote a generic list and lister to denote the name of a particular input. Now, I have to make sure that this actually is a list. So now I'm going to go over to here in my disclosure area where I can specify input types, and I'm going to choose list. And so when we're finished, you'll notice that the header shows swap items A and B of lister, and the 3 dots indicates that lister is in fact going to be a list. So my basic strategy is to pick the item A and item B of lister, store them in variables, and then use the replace block. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to need item, let's drag this over here. I'm going to pick item A of lister. So I'm going to pick that item, and I'm going to store it in a variable. So I just have it at my disposal. So I'm going to need a couple of variables, and I'm just going to call them, and oh, here's a little trick that we had not talked about previously. I can, by clicking on here, create more variables, and I can just do this in one block, and sometimes that saves a little space. So I'm going to call this variable first. It'll be my first, the item that corresponds to element number A, and I'm going to call B, I'm going to call that, of course, second. And then I'm going to set first to item A of lister. So if it says swap items 2 and 5, A is going to be 2, and I'm going to get item 2 of lister, that would be my E, and I'm going to store it in first. I'm going to do the same thing with second, although this time I don't want A. Let me drag that A out of there. I want to use B. So first now will contain item A, which would be item, say, if I was, again, calling this with 2 and 5, it would be item 2, and second would contain item 5. Now, what do I want to do? Well, I have to do some replacements. So I want to replace the item, gotta make sure I get this right. Oops, and I've done something wrong. Let's see, there we go. I think I fixed it properly. I want to replace item A, that's going to be this one here. I want to replace it with second. And likewise, get rid of this here, and get rid of this here. I want to replace item B with first. And of course, I always have to mention the list that I'm working with. Okay, so I grab item A, which is going to be the E, and I'm going to store it in first. I grab my second item, let's say it's U, and I'm going to then replace item 2 with the second, that would have been the U, so the E would become a U. And then I'm going to replace item B, that would be this, with first, which would have been the E, so this is going to end up being an E. The net result is these two are going to end up being swapped. Now you can study this if you'd like. You are invited to do so. I'm pretty sure it's going to work. Let's test it out. Okay, so I'm going to swap items 2 and 5 of lister. All right, nothing up my sleeve, so watch closely. There's my 2 and my 5. And I swap them, and there's the U and the E, and of course I can swap them back. I can swap items 1 and 2, so instead of AE, I get EA, and then back to AE. So things seem to be working as they should. Now, in order to shuffle things then, I need to do this over and over again. So I'm going to need, as you might imagine, to do something over and over again, I'm going to need a repeat block. Now, obviously, I don't want to just swap items 1 and 2. I want to pick 2 numbers at random. Well, we know how to pick numbers at random, don't we? We go into operators, and I'm going to use this a couple of times. And I'm going to need the variables. I'm going to need variables here. I'm building a script, and so I'm going to use script variables. And again, I'll use A and B. And I'm going to just say swap A and B. Now, what are the values of A and B going to be? Well, I'm going to set A to a random number. Likewise, I'm going to set B to a random number. And then I'm going to swap them. And if I do that a certain number of times, I will have, this is a script for shuffling things. So watch closely. I've got A-E-I-O-U. And you're looking at this and thinking, well, wait a minute. This could go horribly wrong because I've only got 5 elements, and yet I'm saying A could be 1 to 10. So should I just make that 5? Well, maybe, but what if my list is a different size? Fortunately, I can find out how big a list is. There is the length of operator, or the length of reporter. So I'm going to just do this, and I'm going to take lister, and there we go. So now how many times should I shuffle this? How many times should I swap items? Well, 10 might be okay, but what if my list was really huge? If it was 1,000 elements, which seems like a lot to type, but let's pretend, this would be extremely cumbersome and to type in, I admit, but swapping just 10 elements or 20 elements would not be sufficient. So I think the number of times that I do the swapping needs to be proportional to the length. So in fact, I'm going to do this. I'm going to repeat as many times as I have elements, I'm going to do swapping. So if I've got a big list, I'm going to do a lot of swapping. If I've got a small list, I don't have to swap as much. So let's go ahead and run this. Hey, it swapped. Hey, it swapped again. Hopefully you can see that happening. Now, this is so useful, it's worth putting into its own block. So I'm going to click on Make a Block, and I'm going to, again in the Variables palette, put something called, let's call it Shuffle, and let's add a list. And I'm going to call this Lister, so I can reuse the name that I've been using so far. And I'm going to insist that Lister be a list. Then I'm going to take all of this magical bit and bring it in here. And now I have a block. I'm pretty proud of this block. And I'm going to click on OK. And there it is. So now I've got swap and shuffle. All right, so let's make a bigger list. And let's put different names in here. I'm going to put names of famous cartoon characters. Let's see, Charlie Brown, Lucy Van Pelt, Snoopy, Linus Van Pelt, and Pigpen. I don't know if Pigpen has a last name. Okay, and I'm going to, I think I'm going to set Lister to this, just to be different. Okay, so there's Lister. And then I'm going to shuffle Lister, and let's see if it works. Yep. Looks shuffled to me. All right. I think that about concludes this video. Again, thank you very much for watching, and make sure you read through the accompanying document on Introduction to Lists. In the next segment of this video, we're going to take a detailed look at exactly what lists are good for. Now that we understand the mechanics of how to work with lists, we're going to sort of flex our wings a little bit and see what we can do with them. So, see you in the next video.